The streets never change. Stone and steel carry the same echoes of footsteps they have for centuries. The same arguments ripple through alleyways. The same laughter tries too hard to sound free. Like a stage play endlessly repeated, the city hums with familiar gestures. Yet, beneath that noise, something else is always unfolding. Power does not live in declarations, it lives in attention. The strongest among us do not announce their dominance. They watch. They notice the small cracks. Every gesture becomes a confession. The slightest hesitation betrays an inner fracture. A careless word spoken offhand becomes a breadcrumb leading to the hidden chambers of a soul. Machiavelli understood this better than most. To rule, he insisted, is not to roar louder than others, but to perceive more sharply. Strength without perception is brittle, the show of power that collapses at the first sign of stress. True power comes from seeing into weakness. Not to mock it, not even to destroy it, but to use it. To know the mask and to strip it away before someone even realizes they are wearing it. Carl Jung named this mask the persona. The polished face we offer the crowd, desperately maintained in order to belong. The smile at the shopkeeper. The firm handshake with hidden trembling. The words rehearsed, not to reveal who we are, but to conceal it. Most believe the persona protects them, but in truth, it betrays them. Like paint glossed over broken wood, the more one tries to perfect it, the more its cracks reveal. Those with eyes sharpened by silence and suffering can see. They notice the mask before the person wearing it realizes it has begun to slip. A nervous laugh too loud. Anger that erupts too quickly. Even avoidance, the shifting of eyes, reveals what words try to conceal. Power lies not in what is claimed, but in what leaks out unconsciously. Jung wrote that what we repress lives on, waiting in the shadow, and the shadow has a way of speaking, even through silence. Schopenhauer understood this as suffering's cruel honesty. Pain cannot be fully hidden. In every life it seeps through, in gestures, in impulses, in the subtle resignation of the eyes. That is why perception matters, because suffering uncovers us constantly, even when we insist we are fine. To see weakness in another is not cynicism. It is recognition. It is to acknowledge that we are bound by shared fractures, all woven from the same fragile thread. And yet, Nietzsche would remind us, the herd thrives precisely because individuals cling to their masks. The herd feeds on appearances, on roles, on conformity. The mask makes survival possible in the crowd, but it also binds us, makes us predictable, visible to those who stand apart. Nietzsche praised the higher spirits, those who stand at a distance, not lost in the blur of voices. From that vantage point, weakness glows like a lantern in the fog. But here lies the paradox Kierkegaard described with such piercing clarity. We fear losing ourselves if the mask shatters. Yet in wearing the mask too long, we lose ourselves anyway. Despair is not only the pain of collapse, but the pain of realizing that the self we perform is not the self we truly are. To spot weakness in others, one must first catch a glimpse of that despair in oneself. The mirror terrifies, because it reflects not just a private wound, but the secret we have organized our entire identity to escape. Alan Watts offered an almost compassionate twist. He warned that the self we defend so violently is only an illusion. The mask is not some accident layered over reality. It is the performance we mistake for the real. To mistake the persona as the whole of the self is to live life in a dream. In the rare silence between conversations, when noise recedes, this becomes clear. The one we cling to is just an echo, chasing its own noise. And so we circle back. The strongest do not dominate through bluster, but through quiet vision. They need not expose weakness directly. They let it expose itself. The city provides endless clues for those willing to wait. They see the overconfident stride that masks fear, the overspoken conviction that hides confusion, the sudden tears when solitude presses too closely. They see that power is not in making others stumble, but knowing exactly when they already have. But here is the unsettling irony. To wield such perception outwardly, one must endure it inwardly. The ability to see weakness in others is born only from standing in silence long enough to face the fractures within yourself. And this inner vision wounds before it frees. It is a private reckoning, an unmasking so total it feels like annihilation. Yet paradoxically, It is here where both freedom and power arise. Machiavelli's insight remains hauntingly clear. Strength without perception is brittle, but perception without self-revelation is shallow. To rule over others may require watching, but to rule over oneself demands dissent. The streets will never change. They will always echo with masks, with chatter, with noise. But within that labyrinth of appearances, perception walks like a hidden king, cloaked not in words but in silence. The one who notices, who truly sees, holds the weight of power. And the heaviest vision is not outward at all. It is the moment your eyes meet the mirror, and you realize the mask you were taught to wear is cracking in your own hands. The city never sleeps. It hums with a nervous rhythm, as though the buildings themselves are breathing, restless, impatient, hungry. Neon advertisements flicker like artificial constellations. Car horns pierce the night. Endless chatter spills from marketplaces and bars. Thousands of footsteps echo, blending into a single anonymous pulse. The city itself is alive, and its heartbeat is noise. Within this noise, every individual must survive, and for that, we wear masks. Some polished to perfection, others hastily thrown on. The persona, Carl Jung named it, the carefully constructed face we present to the world. It is our first line of defense against rejection. It is the social ticket that buys us entry into the herd. Without it, we risk exposure, and exposure means pain. But this mask is costly. Every smile too rehearsed, every confident tone too forced, leaves a subtle tremor at the edges. Jung warned that the persona is necessary, but dangerous. Because eventually, we forget it is a mask. We begin to mistake the role for the self. And when that happens, we do not live. We perform. Watch the crowd closely, and you'll see it. The businessman's confident handshake, just slightly too firm, as if he's crushing not your hand, but his own insecurity. The student blurting answers before the question is finished, as though speed could conceal his fear of inadequacy. The young woman with a laugh that comes too icily, too loud, spinning joy as a veil against despair. Like cracks in old marble, weakness slips through. Pretenses tremble under their own weight. The persona protects, but it also betrays. Machiavelli, centuries before Jung, knew this well. Masks are rarely opaque. To the keen eye, they become blueprints. The harder a mask is pressed against the face, the clearer it reveals what lies beneath. This is where the powerful differ. They do not waste energy in endless performance. They observe. They study the edges of the mask where the fractures show. Every shout that overcompensates. Every silence that hides a scream. Every word repeated until it loses credibility. Power lies not in noise, but in what seeps through the cracks. Nietzsche warned of the herd, that ceaseless rhythm of conformity, lulling people into comfort, flattening the individual into anonymity. In the herd, masks are not questioned, they are celebrated. One becomes what the crowd demands: a job title, a political slogan, a curated smile for photographs. The herd thrives on performance, because performance maintains order. Nietzsche did not admire the herd. It admired those rare individuals strong enough to step beyond it, the ones who dared to see, to live without the narcotic of collective approval. The Bermensch, he called it. The higher spirit who creates values rather than inheriting roles. And yet even he admitted, to become such an individual requires first tearing the mask from your face, or bearing what lies beneath. Here lies the terror. For when the mask cracks, when laughter stops too suddenly, or the voice trembles, despair emerges. Kierkegaard called despair the sickness unto death, not a wound of the body, but of the soul. When the self realizes it has become estranged from itself, behind the mask lingers shadow, fear, shame, longing, rage, and to glimpse it, even for a moment, is to feel annihilation. This is why the herd rushes back to noise, because silence reveals too much. In silence, the mask grows heavy, and the fractures widen. Schopenhauer understood this truth with brutal clarity. Most people cannot endure solitude, because in solitude the mask slips, and what is repressed claws to the surface. Endless chatter, gossip, distraction, noise, becomes anesthesia. Better to drown in noise than to face the quiet where the truth waits. Alan Watts would offer one final twist. he gently suggested that what we fear beneath the mask may not be weakness, but freedom. The illusion of the rigid self, the actor behind the character, may itself be a fiction. When silence strips the mask, it does not reveal death, but presence. Watts would say, "The ego is nothing but an echo, pretending solidity. Beneath the mask there is no fragile me to defend, only life unfolding. And yet, for most, the mask remains. The city demands it. Employers expect it. Friends prefer it. Lovers fall in love with it. Few will ever dare to peel it away, for the herd rewards the actor and punishes the exposed. But power, real power, belongs to those who have begun the unmasking, because only they can see clearly." They do not confuse strength with performance. They recognize the businessman's desperate handshake, the student's anxious blurting, the too loud laughter, because they have seen those same fractures in themselves. They watch the game without being entirely consumed by it. To see others clearly, one must first admit, we too wear these masks. And if we follow Jung, confrontation with the shadow is unavoidable. If we listen to Nietzsche, escaping the herd is imperative. If we hear Schopenhauer, solitude is the crucible. If we heed Kierkegaard, despair is the passage to truth. If we trust Watts, the mask dissolves into presence and we realize there was never anything to defend. The city will go on buzzing, humming, wearing its thousands of faces. Neon flashes, voices blur, laughter covers silence. But the one who begins to see, truly see, knows the truth. Every performance leaks, every mask cracks, and every herd conceals a trembling individual beneath its roar. The crowd will never change, but perhaps you can. Step away from the crowd. The chatter lingers for a moment, still buzzing faintly like the echo of neon lights against wet pavement. Then silence. The door closes. The noise recedes. In that absence, something else begins to stir. Without the herd, without the comfort of noise, the persona starts to weaken. That carefully polished face, the smile rehearsed, the confidence borrowed, the certainty feigned, it wavers. The silence doesn't ask questions. It doesn't accuse. Yet it pierces. The mask, you discover, was only ever strong in the company of others. Alone, it fractures. And through the fracture, the shadow emerges. Jung described this shadow as the dark container holding everything we've disowned. All the envy, fear, craving, rage, shame, pushed down for years, hidden not just from others, but from ourselves. Out there, in the marketplace of masks, we pretend it doesn't exist. But here in silence, without applause or distraction, it follows like breath. Always there. Always watching. It is one thing to notice weakness in others. To see the tremor in their voice, the defensiveness in their speech, the ambition wrapped in false humility. Machiavelli honed that eye. The ability to spot where sincerity ended and resentment began, where smiles concealed envy, where loyalty masked a quiet hunger for betrayal. But it is another thing entirely to face that same vision in yourself. Silence is merciless. It has no audience to impress, no script to perform. It simply waits, and as it waits, illusions collapse. The anger you project outward reveals itself as fear. The pride you depend on trembles with insecurity. The jokes, the distractions, the confidence. All ways of concealing the fact that beneath the armor you are afraid. This is despair. Kierkegaard named it so precisely. Concealment within concealment. Not just the pain of being split, but the deeper agony of refusing to face what lives in us. It is the sickness not of body, but of spirit. The quiet horror of realizing the self has become a stranger to itself. Nietzsche described another dimension of this moment. To look too long into the abyss, he warned, is to risk having the abyss look back. What he meant is simple, but terrifying. The longer you stare into the truths buried within you, the harder it becomes to pretend they are not yours. The abyss responds, reflects. You realize every flaw you so easily identified in others is also a reflection of something in you. Every weakness you've mocked, every fear you've dismissed, every hunger you've despised, they stand waiting in the depth of your own shadow. And it is here that the truly powerful separate themselves, not in grand displays, not in endless strength, but in the endurance to face this inward descent without turning away. Schopenhauer wrote that suffering is the essence of life, and in this moment, it is undeniable. The shadow does not merely show you what you've hidden, it forces you to feel it. Old wounds resurface with fresh pain. Long-buried shame pierces like new cuts. Silence becomes unbearable, because silence means there is no escape. You can distract yourself with work, with noise, with endless motion, but the truth waits patiently, unmoving, certain that sooner or later the mask will crack. Alan Watts suggested an insight that sharpens this paradox. Perhaps what we fear most in the shadow is not its gravity, but its truth. The mask pretends we are singular, clean, coherent beings. But the shadow reminds us we are messy, contradictory, fractured. Watts argued the self we cling to is little more than a story. The shadow tears holes in that story, shows us what we really are. Not a perfect performance, but a field of flickering impulses, light and dark inseparable. Wholeness found only when both are embraced. To descend beneath the mask, then, is not weakness, it is necessity. Every mask conceals, and by concealing, it confirms. The man who boasts of his strength confesses his fear. The woman who never admits regret announces her shame more loudly than anyone who weeps. What we hide becomes visible anyway, leaking through tone, gesture, silence. The shadow always speaks, even when we do not. Machiavelli's rulers knew to look for this: the nervous stutter when oaths of loyalty were sworn, the too sincere tone of a fraud, the ambition that quivered beneath servility. But what made them dangerous was not their cunning alone. It was their willingness to acknowledge those same contradictions within themselves. For if we cannot admit envy in our own hearts, we will never truly recognize it in another's eyes. This is the bitter truth. To see clearly into others, you must first see clearly into yourself. To witness the fractures in a crowd, you must withstand the sight of your own. Power comes not from wearing the mask flawlessly, but from understanding exactly where and why it breaks. Here in the quiet, stripped of performance, the revelation is raw and unbearable. Beneath the mask lies not the glory we imagined, but the shadow we spent years fleeing. Fear, resentment, longing, shame, and yet it is here that the path begins. Integration cannot occur without recognition. Freedom cannot arrive without despair. Jung reminded us, what we do not face in ourselves, we will meet in the world as fate. So the descent continues, to silence, and to shadow, and to despair, not as punishment, but as passage. For only those who have walked beneath the mask, through their own abyss, can return with vision sharp enough to see the masks of others clearly. The crowd will always chatter, the herd will always swarm, the lights will always burn. But the one who has descended knows a deeper truth, that every mask is fragile, every persona is cracked, and every shadow waits to be reclaimed. And that descent, terrifying though it is, marks the first step, not into ruin, but into power. Imagine a cracked mirror. It's not the kind that flatters or distorts, but one that multiplies fracture, reflecting not only a face, but all the fissures in character, all the fault lines running invisibly beneath the surface. This is confrontation. Nietzsche's abyss, that place where ideals dissolve, where meaning trembles and the raw truth of weakness peers back at you. Most recoil from that reflection. The powerful, paradoxically, seek it. For they know that strength without confrontation is hollow theater, a polished mask, easily shattered. Machiavelli did not waste his gaze on ideals, studied flaws under pressure. He knew that what breaks a person reveals what truly commands them. The proud bend under humiliation. The controlling unravel under chaos. Self-righteous collapse when their own shadows are exposed. These moments of fracture, uncomfortable, humiliating, undeniable, are the secret geometry of power. They map not aspiration, but reality. The mirror reveals what most humans spend entire lives trying to conceal. Unmet desires we carefully wrap in rationalizations. Compulsions we dress as principles, wounds that still bleed quietly. Decades after their cause has passed, Schopenhauer was unsparing on this point. Suffering is not an accident. It's not a glitch in existence. It is the law by which life unmasks us. Joy may conceal the unconscious, but pain makes it visible. In suffering, the mirror clears. Weakness comes to the surface because it must. Pain extracts what masks cannot forever hide. For the manipulator, this confrontation is survival. To see clearly where another breaks is to hold leverage, like knowing the hidden hinge of a gate. They live in the brutal pragmatics of the fractured mirror. For the thinker, though, this moment becomes something else. Revelation. To look at another's weakness is to realize you are not seeing them but fragments of yourself. The same cracks, differently shaped. The same fractures, differently lit. Jung pointed to this dynamic. What we despise in others, what we fear in them, what we so eagerly diagnose. We are seeing our own disowned shadow cast into the glass. The mirror is social, yes, but it is also personal. Each recognition of weakness in others sharpens the knife pointing inward. And so this confrontation becomes unbearable, yet essential. We realize every mask we unmask in another is a rehearsal for our own stripping. Every fracture we name in another is a foreshadowing of our own shattering. Every truth we expose in another is a truth we circle in ourselves, waiting to be spoken. The mirror of weakness is not just revelation, it is integration. It tells us, what you see broken is not alien, it is yours. The fears, compulsions, vanities, hypocrisies you recognize in others are not foreign intrusions, but exiled parts of your own soul. Nietzsche warned not to stare too long into the abyss, lest it reflect back. But perhaps this was not a warning of danger, but a promise of truth. For in that reflection lies our most terrifying and our most liberating recognition. Weakness is not what separates us. Weakness is what joins us. Look again into the cracked mirror. The face staring back is fractured, yes, but it is still you. And the fractures do not destroy the image, they reveal its depth. There comes a moment when the stage burns down, when the masks that once held so firm finally splinter, and the self trembles on the edge of annihilation. This is not poetic exaggeration, it is the breaking point. When illusions collapse, we are forced into confrontation with what we have spent years, perhaps whole lifetimes, avoiding. No rehearsed persona, no polished defense, no eloquent justification survives the impact. The collapse comes like fire through dry timber. What was once so carefully arranged, the proud identity, the confident story, the curated mask, disintegrates into ash. Nietzsche called this the confrontation with the abyss. Not merely sadness, not mere uncertainty, but the moment when every external guarantee, God, morality, meaning, order, dissolves into silence. At that edge, only consciousness remains, alone, trembling, staring into a void that offers no promises. Kierkegaard named this despair sharpened, the cry of the self when it realizes. It cannot rest on external certainties. When its props fall away, when the old comforts prove hollow, despair is not weakness. It is the scream of truth breaking through pretenses. Alan Watts reframed this collapse with a subtler tone. This annihilation is not death, but return. It is the dissolution of ego, the thin, brittle illusion of separateness, dissolving back into reality itself. The collapse feels like destruction from the inside, but from a higher view, it is clarification. The false is burned away, and what remains is raw being. Machiavelli, of course, witnessed this collapse in its political form. Courtly intrigues and power games are stages where masks are everything, until they break. He saw rivals cling to long-to appearances, projecting strength long after it cracked. He saw men undone by desperation, their illusions bursting under pressure like overfilled vessels. And he learned, collapse reveals truth more ruthlessly than success. It shows you not who someone pretends to be, but who they are when no mask can be kept intact. Collapse is purification. From silence's relentless pressure, truth emerges stripped of performance. No more slogans of virtue, no more boasts of strength, no more polished narratives of who we wish to be. What stands, trembling but real, is the human being unarmored. This breaking point sorts people with stunning efficiency. Those who cannot bear the collapse double down on illusions. They scavenge for plaster to patch the mask, hide behind louder certainties, cling tighter to appearances that already failed them. They remain trapped, pawns within the games of those who see through them. But those who endure the collapse, who let themselves fall into the abyss without fleeing, awaken different, sharper, more dangerous, and paradoxically more free. Why? Because once the illusions die, once you've experienced that annihilation and survived, no mask terrifies you. No collapse threatens you. No loss of borrowed certainties can enslave you again. The chains of illusion, once broken, rarely regrow. Schopenhauer would remark, "Life itself ensures this collapse again and again. Every love will face disappointment. Every body decay. Every ambition, frustration. And yet each shattering is an invitation, not merely a loss. Invitation to stop clinging to masks and to stand instead in truth, however stark." For the manipulator, collapse is leverage. To spot the moment when illusions break in opponents is to hold their fate. For the thinker, collapse is revelation. To face your own shattering is to know, really know, both your nothingness and your freedom. For the powerful, collapse is initiation. For only those who can withstand annihilation without denial emerge capable of the deepest vision. So the mirror shatters, the masks fall, the stage burns, illusions collapse, and everything seems lost. But here, beneath the rubble, we find the raw material of power, a human who has faced annihilation and endured. Not untouched, not unchanged, but remade. Stripped, not weaker, but cleaner. Dangerous not for what they hide, but for what they can finally see. The collapse is never pleasant, but it is always purification. And those who pass through it emerge different, no longer pawns on someone else's board, but players in their own right. Imagine the aftermath of a storm. The wreckage still lingers, trees bent, windows shattered, streets emptied, but something has shifted. The air is unnervingly clean, as if the storm itself scrubbed the sky of noise. The silence is heavy, yes, but not suffocating. Heavy the way a cathedral feels heavy, not with oppression, but with presence. This is what comes after collapse. On the far side of annihilation, perception sharpens. At first it feels foreign, the absence of clamor, the absence of distraction. Where once the self tried endlessly to patch, to pretend, to perform, now there is only stillness. No, and in that stillness, something unexpected emerges. Clarity. Like mist evaporating to reveal a mountain face, emotions that once clashed against each other now align, precise as constellations against a winter sky. Every thought carries weight. Every sensation arrives painfully exact. Nietzsche knew this well. Having dared the abyss, one is no longer chained by the herd's illusions. To stand where meaning once collapsed, and to keep standing, is to earn the right to create. The herd flees turmoil, shields itself with comforting beliefs. But the one who survives the break discovers something rarer. The ability to see through illusion without running from the void it leaves behind. The silence does not erase suffering. Schopenhauer would say, it sharpens it. But in solitude, suffering turns from noise into signal. It becomes teacher. Silence, he wrote, is the cradle of genuine thought, and now the cradle is occupied. Every echo inside it, every pang of loneliness, every flicker of despair becomes audible. But instead of overwhelming, the mind grows attuned, as though weakness itself had been translated into a new literacy. Picture this. A figure sits alone in a darkened room. The storm outside is ended. The candle flickers with barely visible restraint. At first, aloneness would have been unbearable, the silence too loud, the stillness intolerable. But now the figure breathes in sync with the flame. The silence has stopped mocking. Instead, it has become companion. Kierkegaard would call this inwardness. Despair sharpened to its rawest edge yields paradox. The realization that in losing all certainty, something deeper remains. It's not false hope, not shallow optimism, but the quiet strength of a self that no longer needs illusions to secure its existence. The scream has died down into listening, and in this listening, strange details appear. A lover's laugh that sounded confident yesterday is now heard for its concealed, nervous tremor. A colleague's polished speech reveals the half-second pause where fear leaked through. It's a subtle tension in a hand, the shallow lift of a breath, the dart of eyes to the ground, all suddenly luminous. This is perception after collapse, heightened not out of predation, but out of clarity. The ability to sense the precise moment someone's defenses falter, the instant their mask, however carefully painted, twitches under the pressure of its own weight. You learn to see not the persona, but the shadow flickering beneath it. Jung insisted this was the threshold of individuation. The moment when the shadow ceases to haunt from behind and instead becomes integrated into the whole. Having walked through collapse, you no longer project wounds outward alone. You recognize them in yourself, and so you read them in others with sharper compassion. The enemy outside becomes a mirror of the enemy within, and by recognizing both, the self begins to emerge in fuller form. Alan Watts would tilt the frame one turn further. Emptiness, he said, is not nothing but presence misunderstood. What you feel post-collapse was never void. It was openness, not the absence of self, but the space in which self and world become visible at last. When the inner noise dissolves, the world is not blank. It is alive with detail. Colors of leaves you never noticed. The tension in voices you always dismissed. The fragile courage in someone's eyes as they hold stillness for 1 second longer than their fear allows. The paradox burns like a second sunrise. Clarity does not come from adding more, but from enduring less. Less distraction, less noise, fewer illusions. To sit inside silence until it stops threatening and starts speaking. Nietzsche would call this the preparation of the creator. Having survived the collapse, you are no longer enslaved by the values others hand you. You can stand at the abyss and begin again, sculpting meaning where others only see dust. Not because despair has vanished, but because you bear it without fleeing. Schopenhauer leans in, grim but honest. Suffering remains the law. Collapse does not exempt us. But we now suffer, with eyes open. And in that difference, that sharp precision, lies freedom. And yet what is power here? It is not the cold predator's manipulative edge, not the tyrant's delight in another's fall. Awakening does not mean dominance. It means endurance. See human weakness not as prey, but as pattern. To sense others' fractures with the same quiet recognition with which you honor your own. Power here lies in restraint, in being able to witness the trembling mask without needing to rip it off, to stand in silence and not be crushed by it, to carry perception without drowning in despair. That is the razor's edge of awakening. To see illusions collapse in yourself, in others, and to remain. Still, clear, unflinching. The camera lingers. A window open to twilight, air clean after storm. A whisper of wind moves through, not emptiness. Presence, not meaninglessness, the soil of freedom. Awakening is not dominance over others. Awakening is the strength to endure perception without illusion, to look at the world without disguise, without armor, without borrowed certainty, and still to say yes. The city hums again. Streetlights flicker in evening haze, conversations rise like broken waves, footsteps scatter across pavement. Life continues as if nothing happened, or perhaps as if collapse itself was only a rumor no one wants to admit. The traveler walks among them. The crowd presses close with endless dialogue, chatter spilling from markets, arguments echoing in bars, news hawked from glowing screens. The world tries, as always, to drown its own silence. But something has changed. The traveler listens differently now. Where before words came tangled in sensation, now they separate cleanly, almost painfully. The tones of hypocrisy rise sharp as glass. The fear beneath small talk vibrates like a chord out of tune. The falsity of certainty, the rehearsed laughs, the boasting, each stands naked. Something in the traveler resists responding, not from disdain, but from the gravity silence has left within. Every potential word feels weighted, heavy as metal. Once words were thrown easily, to fill gaps, to perform, to belong. Now, to speak is a decision with consequence. Each syllable carries the echo of solitude, the trace of night survived in the abyss. The traveler has learned, noise can shield, but it cannot heal. Nietzsche understood this tension. He wrote that solitude sharpens precisely because truth frightens the herd. Where the herd seeks comfort in shared illusions, the solitary returns with eyes unclouded. To speak that clarity in the square is dangerous, for truth cuts deep. It unsettles. It stirs the abyss beneath others' masks. Courage, then, lies not just in seeing, but in speaking. Though the crowd will rarely thank you, Jung framed it differently. He knew that when the self integrates shadow rather than denying it, words become charged with authenticity. But such authenticity is not always welcome. Few tolerate speech that shines from integration. It reveals too much, forces subconscious truths into daylight. To hear such words is to glimpse one's own unacknowledged shadow, and people will recoil, resist, or reject rather than listen. So the traveler feels it, each sentence rising is a razor's edge. Communication is no longer neutral. A single phrase can illuminate or isolate. Kierkegaard named this anguish, saw the paradox of inwardness. The authentic self longs to speak truth, but the crowd, trapped in its own noise and fear, mocks what it most needs to hear. The inward individual risks being dismissed, distorted, or condemned. Yet the paradox remains. Silence preserves authenticity, but speech is the only way to share it. The traveler stops at a cafe where voices weave into one ceaseless fabric. Laughter breaks too loudly, complaints grind with bitterness, boasts flare like sparks, in their rhythm lies fear, the desperate avoidance of space where silence might return. The traveler says nothing, yet strangely presence alone shifts atmosphere. Eyes flicker, voices hesitate. Authenticity creates an invisible disturbance, as though silence follows the traveler's body like a shadow. Schopenhauer, bitter but precise, would not be surprised. He knew most people resent authenticity. They prefer chatter to quiet, anything to hold suffering at bay. True speech, distilled through solitude, feels like intrusion. It disrupts the pleasant veil of distraction. Thus the returner must expect resistance, even hostility. Truth rarely tastes sweet when it has not been sugared with illusion. Still, words cannot be abandoned entirely. To live among the crowd requires speaking again, yet speech has been transfigured. It carries a new weight, forged from collapse, tempered in silence, sharpened by integration. Machiavelli, keen student of power, grasped this long before psychologists gave it names. He observed that a prince does not gain authority by speaking often, but by speaking seldom and strikingly. Words should arrive like unsheathing a blade, sparing in number, unmistakable in consequence. Too much speech is weakness. But one true word, spoken precisely, can shape fates more surely than decrees. Watch the traveler now. The crowd debates, laughs, interrupts itself, opinions clashing like dull cymbals. Then, at last, the traveler speaks. Not loudly, only with clarity. The words themselves are simple, but in their simplicity burns the authority of silence. The effect is palpable, the noise falters, eyes turn. A hush spreads the way fire does, in widening rings. A single word of truth silences faster than volumes of chatter. This is the weight of words after collapse. They are not tools of belonging anymore, but blades of revelation. They carry the echo of inward nights passed in despair. They emerge not to flatter, but to illuminate. And illumination always wounds before it heals. Alan Watts might lean forward here with a gentle smile. You see, you are not the speaker, nor the silence. You are the space in which both appear. Words are leaves. Silence is the wind that moves them. Without the wind, they fall lifeless. Without silence, they lose meaning. The traveler understands, after all, silence has been the true teacher. It was silence that dismantled illusion, sharpened perception, carved away pretense. Now every sentence must serve silence, not replace it. And so the return is paradoxical. Among the crowd, the traveler does not tower, does not perform, does not seek dominance. Rather, they carry silence into speech like water carried in cupped hands. Careful, scarce, not wasted. This is power now, not in abundance, but in scarcity. Not in chattering endlessly, but in offering language sparingly, when its precision will pierce. So the city hums on, voices clashing, markets roaring, the herd moving as it always has. Yet one among them walks differently. Speech has become choice. Silence has become teacher. And words once casually scattered like dust, now fall like stones into still water. The ripples remain long after the sound fades. Dawn. The screen slowly brightens. A lake lies still as glass, the world holding its breath. Mist curls along the surface where water meets air, drifting like thoughts dissolving into awareness. No wind, no birdsong, no movement, just silence, radiant and alive. This is where the journey ends, or perhaps where it truly begins. Silence. The one presence that has shadowed every step, mocked in despair, feared in collapse, endured in awakening. Now at last it reveals its true face, not absence but force. It's not the hollow void once mistaken for nothing, but the invisible ground from which everything grows. The traveler sits by the water's edge. The face is weathered, not by age, but by confrontation. Shadows integrated, illusions burned, words sharpened by scarcity. The body carries fatigue, yet the eyes rest clear, unhurried. They gaze into the lake where dawn's light expands across the surface like fire waking in glass. Nietzsche warned, the herd flees silence, rushing into chatter and distraction. But the higher spirit endures muteness. To resist endless noise, to refuse the narcotic of distraction, marks the one who has faced the abyss and did not shatter. The herd cannot linger here upon the silent shore. It terrifies them. Yet what terrifies the herd strengthens the creator. Out of silence, meaning may be shaped anew. Jung would name this moment fertile, not barren. In silence, the unconscious is heard. 1,000 fragments once exiled into shadow, now emerge in softened tone, allowed space to breathe. Its persona no longer dominates. The mask has cracked and been set aside. Silence becomes the dark soil of individuation, where the full self puts down roots. The camera lingers on reflection, the traveler's face mirrored in water, fragmented by ripples. For a moment the reflection splits, shadow, mask, and face, then reforms as one. This is integration, not perfection. The willingness to sit with fractures until they belong. Kierkegaard would lean into this paradox. Silence, he wrote, is inward truth. For when words collapse and certainties die, silence remains unshaken. It does not cling to approval. It does not beg to be understood. Inwardness grows here, a self not dependent on the crowd, but rooted in the unspoken paradoxes of existence. Despair has burned to embers, and from those embers comes inward steadiness, both fragile and eternal. Schopenhauer, the somber witness to suffering, declared silence true wealth. Not coin, not status, not the opulence of praise, but freedom from trivial noise. In this stillness by the lake, one begins to understand him. Every distraction, every chatter that fills the city, pales against this quiet presence. To be free from incessant noise is to taste what he called liberty of spirit. Suffering still remains. The world does not spare its cruelty. Yet silence turns suffering translucent, no longer clogging but clarifying. Alan Watts, half smiling by the water's edge in imagination, would whisper differently. Silence is not absence at all. It is presence misunderstood. We mistake its depth for void, but it is the very field in which separateness dissolves. In silence, the illusion of the isolated self fades. One is not the noise of thought, not the persona presented, not even the shadow integrated, but the spaciousness in which all of it floats, like mist, dissolving at dawn. The traveler runs a hand across the lake's surface. The ripples spread, then vanish. This is silence, not static, but dynamic. Alive, always moving beneath the still exterior. To sit with it is to feel its force, patient as roots, sharp as lightning when needed. The film now closes in rhythm and image. The crowd's noise echoes faintly, dissolving behind the mountains. The lake reflects the sunrise, surface still, depths unseen, but alive with movement. The traveler breathes evenly, eyes open, no urgency in them, only presence. And in voiceover, the philosophy threads together, each thinker converging like streams into the silent lake. Nietzsche. Silence is the mark of higher spirits who endure what the herd fears. From silence emerges the will to create, to say yes to life without illusion. Jung. Silence is the unconscious knocking, the shadow asking to be received. In that reception, individuation dawns. Kierkegaard. Silence is the paradox of inwardness, when nothing external sustains certainty, and yet the self stands, unbroken and inwardly true. Schopenhauer Silence is wealth, reprieve from triviality, the freedom to think without the crowd's intrusion. Watts, silence is presence, not void, but the living fullness where the illusion of separateness dissolves into unity. The dawn slowly whitens into day. Shadows retreat, outlines sharpen. Traveler rises, not hurried, not triumphant, simply present. The lake behind them remains radiant, surface unbroken, silence humming like hidden music. The lesson is clear now. Silence was never emptiness. It has always been power, flowing unseen beneath perception. The force that allowed collapse to be endured, shadow to be faced, illusions to fall away. The invisible strength beneath words, beneath masks, beneath all the frantic machinery of the crowd. The traveler walks away slowly, into the brightening world. No armies, no banners, no thunder of applause. Only the quiet authority of someone who has learned that speech is option, noise is choice, and power lies first in the discipline to be silent. The screen lingers on the still lake, its surface glass, its depths alive. The final whisper comes not as voice, but as silence itself. Pressing into the audience like a hidden weight, silence was never absence, it was always force, hidden, waiting, alive, fade to black.